connectivity is still an issue, and that many of our students are unable to access the internet, even though they've got the devices. So I know the Department of Education, Pender, and others have been working like mad on that, and I believe that just this week a number of hotspots have been distributed, and that so we're working on that. But more generally, we need better broadband, and if we ever doubted it, what's happened over the last couple of months has underlined that fact. For education, for business, for just general connectivity, for telehealth, you name it. And it's something I've been working on for a long time, and I've got people in Maine working on it, and we're gonna keep at it. It's an issue in all rural states. My colleague on the Rural Broadband Caucus is Shelley Moore Capito, Republican senator from West Virginia. We've got Arkansas, the Dakotas, Nebraska, the Montana, the places you would expect. And this is something that we really have to address. And if there's any good news about this pandemic, it's been that it really has underlined the importance of broadband. And there's talk now in Washington of an infrastructure bill. And what I told somebody the other day, don't come and talk to me about an infrastructure bill. I'm not interested unless it has broadband in it in a big way. That's got to be part of the package. And hopefully, that message will get through. I think there are enough people down here that get that. If they didn't before, they do now. So that's a little diversion. I want to thank all of you for what you're doing. It's really important. Personal financial education is a, it has been a gap, frankly, and we have kids coming out of school without that kind of knowledge about bank accounts and loans and mortgages, and the fact that college loans have to be paid back, and what interest means, and the difference between 3% and 6%. All of what you're doing is really critical in preparing our kids for what's coming at them. And I think in this situation, it's even more so because people and families are under such stress. The one sort of political message I want to share with you, and then I will, let's see, somebody's asking me for FaceTime. The answer is no. The one message I do want to share is that the big political fight down here over the next year or so is going to be about aid to the states. And I say year or so, week or so. Aid to the states is the big fight, and you have a stake in it. What a lot of people don't realize, and this is not personal finance, this is state finance, but about a third of the state budget in Maine goes directly back to the communities, mostly in the form of general purpose aid to education, but also aid in terms of revenue sharing for the communities. That means that if the state doesn't get help in this situation, we're going to be crushed, and everybody's going to suffer, from education, to first responders, to state workers who are doing critical outreach work, to Medicaid, you name it. So to the extent you have connections and have a national association, and let's see, MSNBC, we don't need to talk to them right now. But to the extent you have colleagues in other states, please pass the word how important this is in the next really 4 or 5 days, to get word to their senators particularly that we've got to help the states, because otherwise it's going to be really damaging to everything that you're doing and that we're doing, that we're trying to do together. And so that's my political message right now, because it's crucial, and it's the damage will flow right down to the community, right down to the schools, and we've got to work together to be sure that doesn't happen. So, and I want to congratulate Raylene and Sammy for their recognition today, for the work that they've done at Madison and up in Aroostook. Great work, both of you. The story I read indicated that you had to sort of reinvent yourself and reinvent the program and the courses, but you did that. Jumpstart has helped, and that's a big part of why I'm here, is to offer that congratulations. Both of my parents were public school teachers, and my older sister was a public school teacher. I had to settle for teaching at the college level, but I know what teaching is about, and I know what you all contribute to your community and to the kids that you love and you work with every day. And I know how hard this has been for teachers to be apart from their students. And I just want to thank you for the creativity you've shown in keeping the learning process going. Hopefully we're going to be back to normal, if not by the end of this year, by the fall. I think that's a hope. What I just said to somebody is we should hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. And that means continuing to work on this awful virus so that we can safely reopen our state and our country. So those are some thoughts. Congratulations to Raylene and Sammy, and thanks and congratulations to Jumpstart for all you've done and are doing for Maine and for the students in Maine. So if you have questions, now's the time.
Thank you so much, Senator. We have some really wonderful questions. The first one I want to ask is very specific to personal finance. And the question is, what do you wish that you had been taught as a young adult or in school or about personal finance as an adult or in your current role today? Where are the gaps? What do you wish you had learned earlier on?
Well, that's a really good question, because in my family around the dinner table, we talked about mostly politics and public affairs. And my father ended up, after teaching, while he was teaching, he went to night law school and he ended up practicing law. But I wish I had known more about, sort of planning and budgeting. It wasn't really something that I learned till later in life. And, I really didn't understand the difference between, 2 or 3% and 6% in terms of the magic of compounding. I think that would have been something that would have helped me later in life. I think the whole the interrelatedness of the economic system, personal finance and mortgages and all of those kinds of things, that's where I would have started. Would be, I think, planning and budgeting would be the thing that I didn't learn, and would have been the handiest to know as a practical matter leaving high school. I have to say, the most important course I had in high school, interestingly enough, was speech and debate. Not necessarily because it taught me how to make speeches, but it taught me how to organize my thoughts. And I learned in my speech class from Roger Bergstrom in Alexandria, Virginia in 1962 about organizing my thoughts, writing an outline. And I think that kind of practical knowledge from a personal finance course, which I didn't have, would have been equally helpful.
That's great. Thank you so much. That leads very nicely into the next question. What advice would you give to our students who will be graduating this year from college and entering the job market, given the current situation that we're in?
Yeah, it's really tough. If you don't watch yourself, you're going to get my whole graduation speech, which is entitled 10 Things I Wish Somebody Had Told Me When I Was 18. I won't go through the whole thing, but some of them I think are particularly relevant now. I think one of the most important pieces of advice for people coming out of school today is be the best you can be at whatever your first job is. I think a lot of times young people, they have big dreams and they say, I'm going to be a senator, or I'm going to be a vice president, or I'm going to be a professional basketball player. And they sort of blow off the job of greenskeeper at the golf course, or babysitter, or lifeguard. My advice to young people is make an impression with that first job. Be the best lifeguard they ever had. And so I think that's an important piece of advice. Now, here's an interesting thing from your point of view, and you all may virtually hammer me on this. But that speech that I mentioned, I've been giving for 30 years. I stumbled upon that formula of 10 things I wish somebody had told me when I was 18, a long time ago. And it's a good idea. Some of you have probably heard the speech. But one of the points I used to make, one of my 10 points was, you'll hate this. One of my 10 points was always round off to the nearest dollar when you're balancing your checkbook. I always used to say life is too short for 4-digit subtraction. So if your check is for $8.90, write $9. Well, there are two things about that. Number one, you may not like that advice. I once gave a graduation speech and got a note from an accountant saying, "You've just undone 10 years of my work with my kids." But the second thing is I don't do it anymore because people very rarely balance checkbooks. I've dropped that item because the students look at me blankly because everything is electronic and they get their statement at the end of the month. Now I do give them one other piece of financial advice, and that is to always carry a $20 bill rolled up and hidden somewhere on your person, in your wallet or in your shoe, because you never know when you'll need emergency money, and you always run out. And so that's my other direct piece. I think that's item number 6 on the top 10 list. I replaced the don't do 4-digit subtraction with don't write anything on the internet that you don't want your grandmother to read on the front page of the newspaper. And that usually gets a pretty good rise out of particularly the parents.
Absolutely. That's great advice. I'm going to check the Q&A online in just a moment. One of the questions that we had was more relative to this current situation. Can you share some of the ups and downs of the U.S. Senate working remotely in Zoom and this virtual environment? How is it going for you? What is your experience? Has it been like?
Well, I can tell you, I was home for about 5 weeks. We adjourned right after passing the big COVID, the CARES Act at the end of March. I went back to Maine, quarantined for 14 days before moving back in to the house with Mary. I don't know if I've ever worked harder. I found at the end of each day, I was just exhausted. In fact, I was texting with one of my colleagues down here at the Senator, one of my Senate colleagues the other night. It was about 6:30, and I said, "How about we get together for a virtual beer?" And he texted back and said, "I've just gotten off my 7th Zoom call of the day. I'm taking a walk." It's been very intense, and I don't know whether it's the lack of sort of personal contact, but I don't mind doing it. I'm delighted that we're able to do what we're doing right now. But I found that it was really intense. On the other hand, I've been able to talk to more people. I mean, I'm talking to 80 plus teachers right now in Maine that physically would have been hard to get to the Civic Center and schedule it along with all the other things that I'm supposed to do when I'm back in Maine. So in that sense, I did a teletown hall with AARP that they tell me had something like 20,000 people on it. And I've done Zoom with hundreds of people. So it's an advantage in the sense of your ability to connect with people, but there's something about it that is wearing. And so I'm back in Washington now. But I got to tell you, I've been to 3 Senate hearings this week, none of which I had to be at. I had to put on my mask, get to the Capitol, go in, and they could have all been done remotely. In fact, one of them, I sat here in the House and watched the first half remotely, and then had to drive to the Capitol, be there for time to ask my questions, and then leave. I could have asked the questions remotely. It was what I'm irritated that we've been brought back here and that we're not doing things that A, either couldn't be done remotely, and B, don't have anything to do with COVID. To bring us down here to confirm judges, to me, is just not appropriate. And it's not necessarily myself or 100 senators, but when we're brought back, there's a whole lot of staff. the people that manage the Capitol, a dozen Capitol Police have been tested positive for the virus, and to put them in harm's way. So, you know, we're down here to say we're down here. I just, you know, I think it's not responsible, but through some oversight, I'm not in charge. So I'm here. And for example, all the Senate work ended yesterday. And yet it doesn't make sense for me. I'm not going to fly. I'm not going to get on an airplane. So I'm here in Washington for 3 days waiting for things to open up again on Monday. I thought at the least if we were being dragged down here that we'd all be working through the weekend. We should be. So, you know, sorry to share with you my personal reactions, but most of what we're doing could be done remotely. And there's no testing here, by the way. There's not adequate tests for us. So and we've got, you know, a fair number of senators that are over 65, but we don't have testing. So to me, it's an unnecessary risk until we're working on COVID. I'm perfectly willing to be here, work on COVID, do the negotiations, get the next bill going. But in the meantime, as you can tell, I'm sort of frustrated. I'd rather be home. During the time off, Mary learned to make really good sourdough bread, and I miss it.
I don't blame you a bit. It's a really great question here. And it is, what advice or what suggestions would you give to teachers to help them advocate or push for a mandated personal finance class at the K-12 level within their districts? Any advice that you have for teachers of how teachers and students can be a better voice for that? I think we have certainly so many teachers in Maine and families who understand the critical need, but there still is quite a gap among districts that are offering personal finance as a course or a course requirement for graduation. Any thoughts that you can share on a way to advocate for that?
Yeah, and this is off the top of my head. I mean, I haven't had this question before, but I'm trying to think if I were a school board member. So if I was a school board member, the first thing I would want to see, I think, is a lesson plan, a coherent, and you know, does it have to be a whole year, for example? Could it be done in a semester? So a lesson plan, what is it you're going to teach? What are the elements going through? That would help me rather than say, do you want to support a personal finance class? Do you see what I mean? I think it would be helpful to be as specific as possible to demonstrate to the policymaker what it is you're doing and why it's important. Secondly, I think to the extent you can generate data about the lack of financial literacy among 20-year-olds or 18-year-olds and what the results are, the bad decisions that they're liable to make. For example, I think a lot of young people, I think one of the failures of our student loan system is inadequate counseling. I think, you know, when you think about it, 18-year-olds are signing documents that are committing them to payments that they're going to be making for the next 10 or 15 years till they're in their 30s. And I'm not sure they fully comprehend, you know, what that means. You know, that somebody's going to hand them a hunk of money. What does it mean? What does interest mean? If I borrow 10,000, holy smoke, does that mean I've got to pay back 20? You know, that kind of thing. So to demonstrate to the policymakers the real world significance of it, of this kind of education, I think would be the second step. That would be the way I would approach it is, A, here's what we're going to teach, and B, here's why it's important. And you could reverse the order, I suppose. But if I were a school board member, that's what I would need to hear.
That's great advice, Senator. For our educators, as part of this meeting today, what advice would you give to them to share with their students as to ways that they can, you know, help to have their voice be heard at the state and local and federal level? What advice would you give to those students in terms of the best way to reach their representatives and senators? What would you suggest?
Maine, the Maine policy process is ridiculously accessible. Legislators don't have offices. You go to the State House and go to the third floor, and legislators are milling around, and you can walk up and talk to them. It's very easy to do that. The other thing to realize is that legislators, and both in Washington and in Augusta, are in fact responsive to what they hear from their constituents. And particularly at the state level, I used to say that six letters was a tidal wave, 10 letters was, you know, a nuclear explosion. I mean, it doesn't take a lot to get the attention of local leaders and city council members. You can go to the meetings, you can ask questions, school board. I think the message that should be passed on to students is how accessible it is. This isn't something that takes place in a distant city in the dead of night. It's open and available, and you'll see your legislator in the grocery store. And I can tell you that we are responsive to what we hear. And so I think the message to students is it's there for you. Take advantage of it, and don't complain if things don't go the way you think they should, if you don't vote and you don't take part.
Absolutely. And would you say that in this day and age with social media and email and electronic communication, is the good old-fashioned snail mail more effective? Would it get more attention? And of course, there's a lesson in that for students. I can
only respond from my point of view. We don't distinguish between forms of communication. When my staff comes to me and says, we got 180 comments on, you know, what you said about COVID, it doesn't, I don't think it really matters, to be honest with you. Let me just put it in perspective for you. In my office, and I don't know what's been going on, I don't have counts during this odd period that we're in, but typically over the last 6 and 7 plus years, we get between 2,500 and 3,500 communications a week from Maine. Around 3,000 distinct emails, calls, letters, mostly emails from people in Maine. That's a lot. I try very hard to provide real answers to people when they write in. I've never liked getting a letter that says, thank you for your views, I'll keep them in mind. So I have a staff of 5 or 6 young people whose sole job it is to answer mail, and they give me the drafts, and then I correct them and edit them. The dreaded comment is, let's discuss. That means to the young person that wrote the email, Angus isn't crazy about this one. We're going to talk about it and try again. But we really try to give substantive answers. So, but I think the answer to your question is, be in touch. I don't think it really matters. I think email is just as effective. Be persistent. Now, the other thing is, it doesn't help to email every day, to say help with COVID, and then send a note tomorrow that says help with COVID. That doesn't really, that's not very effective. What's effective is thoughtful comments and suggestions about how we can do our job better. And there's no shortage of those, by the way.
Great, thank you. So shifting gears a little bit, this question is specific to national service. So the question is, like MLTI being a step forward, David Brooks of the New York Times just promoted a Senate bill for national service. Isn't that the best stimulus investment for our students at this time?
I'm a co-sponsor of that bill.
You want to spend a little time talking about that?
Yeah, basically it's a significant expansion of AmeriCorps and Teach for America and those kinds of programs. We think there are right at this moment, there's a huge need for contact tracing, for determining who's infected and who were they in touch with, so we can try to cut it off at the pass. And that takes a lot of manpower. The estimate I've seen is we need something like 150, 175,000 people. We now have 7,000 people doing it. We need, 50 times what we're talking about now. And we think there are people who are interested in doing that. And they'd be paid. They wouldn't be paid a lot. It would be comparable to AmeriCorps. It's like the Peace Corps. It's public service for a year or two. And I think for all the reasons David Brooks spelled out, that this is a good idea. Chris Coons, my colleague from Delaware, very thoughtful guy, senator from Delaware. I think he's one of 2 senators with a divinity degree. Anyway, he's really been spearheading this. I signed on immediately when he started talking about it. I think it's something that would be really helpful. It would give young people something to do. It would connect them to the community, service. It's comparable to the Civilian Conservation Corps that was such a big deal during the Depression. And as we're moving out of this, or hopefully moving out of this terrible situation, young people are going to be looking for jobs, and this would be a great place to start.
That's wonderful. We, as a volunteer president for Maine Jumpstart, my full-time employment is with the Finance Authority of Maine, as you know, and we have hosted an AmeriCorps member for many, many years, and that individual has just been invaluable when it comes to offering trainings such as these and outreach and communications and kind of, getting the word out and supporting teachers beyond the work of just our staff at FAME and our volunteer efforts through Jumpstart. So I can't agree with you more.
And at this particular moment in time, it makes so much sense because we're going to have we just learned this morning, 14.5% unemployment. Well, this is a way to put a lot of people to work. And instead of just writing checks, let's write checks and have people contribute to their community at the same time. And we've got right in front of us this enormous task of contact tracing, which it all comes together. And I think it would be good for the country in any case, but I think right now it's particularly relevant. That's why it took me about 30 seconds to say yes when we started talking about this.
Well, and with this pool of graduating college students who might perhaps not have, an immediate job in place, I mean, what a great opportunity to grow their profession.
Absolutely.
And, so absolutely the timing is right. So one last question, I think we've got time for one more, and it's around easing of testing. Could easing federal expectations for testing data be another form of aid or support to K-12 schools? I think this distant learning challenge, more time to teach if we just administer the NUIA, for example, and suspend other assessments. Are there any conversations going on around relaxing some of the testing requirements for schools? Anything that you can shed any light on there?
Well, I can't honestly say that I'm privy to conversations because one of the major casualties of this situation is a lack of conversations. Normally, I'll give you a little homework. When we get back to normal, if you watch C-SPAN and you see a vote in the Senate, you see almost all 100 senators milling around talking. And we're generally doing business and talking about amendments and ideas and proposed bills and that kind of thing. And that's all gone now. I mean, you go in to vote and it's sort of eerie. Nobody's there. Everybody has a mask on. You walk in, you vote, and you walk out. So in terms of conversations, no. I can tell you I have felt for some time, and having my kids go to public schools, there's too much testing. And it takes away from, a friend of mine once said, don't let education get in the way of education. And I think we need to really rethink that. And I have to say, when I was elected governor in the 90s, I was a big testing advocate on the idea that, we should know what we're getting and we should be able to measure progress and those kinds of things. I still think that makes sense, but I think we need to figure out how to do it taking fewer days, less time. And I have felt that since, Molly was at Brunswick High, and Mary and I noticed, how many days out of the limited number of instructional days go into testing. So I don't think it should be dropped entirely. I think there's something to be said for standards and seeing whether we're meeting the standards, accountability. But at the same time, I think we sort of went overboard on it. It got to be a big business, and it was. I think it's too much. That's not a. That's something I've thought for some time. I can't honestly say what the discussions are. We did pass a major elementary and secondary bill a couple of years ago that I was involved with to try to ease up somewhat on the federal requirements, and to leave more to the states. As my friend Lamar Alexander used to say, we're going to make it so that school boards and state directors don't have to say "Mother, may I" to Washington all the time. And I think we were successful in that. But the testing, I think, is something that does bear further examination and absolutely and further discussion. Listen, thank you so much for this time. It's been fun. This has not been a strained Zoom call. I'm energized and excited by it, and I just love what you guys do. It's so it's so important. It's so real. And again, Sammy and Raylene, just my warmest congratulations, and thanks to everyone on the call for what you're doing, and particularly in these hard times. Believe it or not, we will get through this. I don't know when, but all of us are going to look back and remember the spring of 2020. I can guarantee you that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Senator. Thank you for all your good work on behalf of the state of Maine and for being here. Let's do this again, hopefully next time in person, when we can have an opportunity for you to interact with this amazing group of teachers. But thank you so much for being here today. We really very much appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. Talk to you later.
Take care.
Bye-bye.